Now it's time for today's perspective. And as the Israel-Hamas war continues, the fear remains, of course, that the war could also open up on Israel's northern border. For several weeks now, Israel has been trading tit-for-tat attacks across the Lebanese border with Hezbollah. The fear then that the situation there could well widen the conflict, even potentially drawing in Hezbollah ally and funder Iran. With me now is Ziad Majed, who's originally from Lebanon. He's been living here in France now for nearly 20 years, and he's currently Professor of Middle East Studies at the American University here in Paris. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme. Do you think Hezbollah will finish up fighting fully against Israel? I mean, whether because it just decides to do so, or whether it just gets dragged into it and there's no other alternative for it?
For the time being, it's difficult to, be sure about it. What is clear is that on both sides, on the Israeli side and on Hezbollah side, there is a desire, let's say, to keep it a low-intensity conflict. They clash daily. There are also sometimes military operations. But for the time being, Hezbollah has two factors that are decisive factors. One is internal, related to the Lebanese society, to the economic disaster, to the fact that part of its own social basis doesn't want to be into a new war, and that the political divisions in Lebanon also make it a bit difficult for the party to be fully involved in a full-scale conflict. The other question is related to the strategic assessment that might be made by Iran and Hezbollah concerning how Hamas is doing in Gaza, if they consider that Hamas is threatened existentially, or that the Israelis might be able to invade the whole of Gaza, or at least a large part of the north, weakening Hamas dramatically, then we can expect a certain military confrontation that goes beyond what we are seeing for now. And there are at the same time some attempts by regional actors, but also by the US and the Iranians, to send messages in the sense that we prefer not to have a full-scale confrontation, but we might be forced to go into that if things get worse in Gaza.
Let's take those 2 points individually then. Start off with the first one that you were mentioning there. I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because the situation in Lebanon for people living in there, they're already in the middle of a very severe economic crisis. The last thing most people in Lebanon want is a war between Hezbollah and Israel.
Absolutely. That's a political question on the one hand, because also Hezbollah has lots of opposition when it comes to the political map itself in Lebanon. Many forces are saying we don't want to be into that war because it's not like a question of Lebanese security or safety that is today on the table. Plus, there are all those who historically were opposed to Hezbollah as being an armed party capable of taking the decision of war and peace, while it should be a centralized question by the Lebanese state. So there is this consideration with the economic disaster and with the fact that 2006, when the war happened in July, between Hezbollah and Israel, and all the damages in the Lebanese infrastructure and the social basis of Hezbollah was targeted with hundreds of people killed and huge destruction. It took lots of time to rebuild, to reconstruct, and with the current situation today, no one expects such a reconstruction to be possible or even an easy process. So that's one important consideration. And the other remains related once again to the region in which Lebanon is obliged to be connected. But what can Hezbollah do also to avoid being directly involved is to keep the borders tense, kind of, as we said, low-intensity, violent situation, and allow sometimes Palestinian groups from Lebanese Palestinian refugee camps to operate so that it will say the front is there, but we're not directly involved.
One way they could become involved, though, is your second point, I suppose. Yes. If Iran sees that, depending what happens with the situation in Gaza, and pressures Hezbollah to get more involved.
Yeah, that's for sure also, because Iran will make such a decision if their assessment is that one of their important allies is weakened or even threatened. In that case, other considerations will become the priorities, meaning the regional situation and balance of power. And in that case, the Hezbollah can not only use Lebanon, but even the Syrian territory, where it deployed already troops to support Assad and where they have a military basis. So that can bring in a larger conflict. And that's why I think the US sending diplomatic messages on the one hand and sending its, army in a way on the other, is trying to contain a possible tension, supporting Israel in its operations in Gaza, but preferring not to go into a larger confrontation. However, we might see also attacks against American positions, and we started to see it in Iraq, in Syria, to keep that contact in fire, but to say that we don't want more than this current situation.
I know you worked as well for the Red Cross in Lebanon for many years. I mean, knowing the situation there like you do, how difficult do you think it could get for the Lebanese people? We've already seen a lot of people being moved back away from the border, on, as I said before, on top of all the economic problems they're already facing.
Yes, there are already 20,000 internally displaced Lebanese who left South Lebanon, live in schools and in some villages where facilities were open to them. So there's already, in that sense, the beginning of a crisis. At the same time, when you don't have enough electricity, not enough water, when there is a lack when it comes to medical treatment, when salaries lost their purchasing power, when the Lebanese pound has been devaluated, all of that adds to the tension that people feel, to the fears, to the anxiety, and we know that there is, on that level, a serious issue. But at the same time, one should not probably minimize the emotional impact of the images coming from Gaza, where there are many people also who support Hezbollah, not only in Lebanon, but throughout the region, who could push or consider that opening a second front is a kind of a responsibility to support the Palestinians, to modify the current balance of power in the region. So there are lots of different directions when it comes to how the decision would be made, or lots of pressures. But so far, I still believe that they prefer not to go into a large-scale war.
Looking at the conflict more generally as a whole, what do you feel about the latest, could say, positive signs, I suppose? I mean, for a start, we've had the aid being able to get into Gaza through the Rafah crossing. We've also had some hostages released, and there were reports that there may be others released as well.
Yeah, these are good signs. I mean, the first, that we can have more humanitarian aid going into Gaza, is extremely important, because hospitals are lacking what they need to keep operating, because people have problem when it comes to access to water. Of course, there is no more electricity. There are lots of humanitarian important crises taking place in Gaza under the siege and the Israeli attacks. But at the same time, if we do not negotiate a ceasefire, or at least like a daily ceasefire that will allow much more humanitarian aid to circulate and to reach all concerned populations, it will remain, I'm not saying cosmetic because it's important, but it will not be decisive when it comes to the needs of the population. In addition to that, there should be also political messages and mediations to not only have a ceasefire, but to think of what shall we do after the end of this terrible episode. We have seen similar episodes in the past, and as long as there is no political solution recognizing the legitimate rights of the Palestinians when it comes to ending the occupation, the illegal settlements, the siege of Gaza, there will always be such kind of episodes, and we have seen it in the past many times. So there is a need as well for a political message and for pressure in order to go beyond the current dramatic, tragic situation, and not only to be satisfied with some humanitarian aid that is, according to all reports, far from being sufficient for the population.
Great to talk to you on the programme today. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us there, Ziad Majed from the American University here in Paris.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.